Hello, and thank you for joining me. I'm Mark Chussell, the founder of Advanced Competitive Strategies. Welcome to this ACS strategy story, a brief presentation on a single strategy subject. This time, we're going to talk about bias, logic, and sharks in Australia with some lessons for business. Now, I certainly would never fall into the logic traps that I'm about to describe, and I'm sure you wouldn't either. But they're fun and you can use them to amaze your friends. Now, I'm sure that you saw the mistake in how I spelled people. There are also hidden mistakes, subtle mistakes, and those are the ones that we have to watch for, such as when we have the right spelling but the wrong word. Here we're going to be talking also about how to stop people's mistakes. Now, the summary of this awfully wordy slide is that I have researched and consulted in competitive strategy around the world for over 40 years. The rest is all detail. We've all heard about the dolphins who just know that swimmers lost at sea are in distress and they need to find land. But how do dolphins know that swimmers are lost and that they want to find land? It's likely, as mathematician and author John Allen Paulos points out, that pushy dolphins just happen to push the swimmers in all directions, but the only ones we hear from are those who got pushed randomly towards shore. That is survivor bias. We only hear from the survivors. We also only hear about businesses that survive. I worked for 15 years at the Strategic Planning Institute, where we analyzed databases of real business results. And we tried to create a database of startup businesses so we could learn what works for them and what doesn't work for them. But we couldn't get the data we needed. Either the companies were crazy busy and they didn't want to participate, or they vanished fast. That's one reason why we know so much less about startups than about established businesses. Now, a bonus thought here. Why do startups ever beat incumbents? Incumbents have, or at least they can have, literally all of the advantages. But that's not today's subject. Imagine that you are ill. You go to your doctor who prescribes a miracle drug. And you ask, Doctor, does this drug help people who wear blue shirts? I'm a person who wears blue shirts. Does the drug have side effects for people who wear blue shirts? Now, in business, we hear my business is different, but different in what way? Do they not have customers who make purchase decisions? Do they not have costs? Do they not have competitors? Do they not have accountants? We say that things are as different as apples and oranges, but apples and oranges actually are far more similar than they are different. You can eat both. They're both nutritious. They grow on trees. They are round. They are about the same size. Now, they're not the same, but they are not as different as watermelons and tofu, and nowhere near as different as poems and constellations. And there is often benefit in looking at different businesses, markets, and industries. I conducted a business war game in which my client said that they sold a commodity and that was that. Then they discovered in the war game that they were going to lose a ton of money. The boss said, okay, let's rethink differentiation. And they figured out a way how to differentiate by focusing on service. Now, that might sound obvious to you, and it might have sounded obvious to them in retrospect, but it wasn't obvious to them before the war game. These people had each spent decades reinforcing the idea, the story, that they sold a commodity, and they believed it. Harvard Business School professor Rosabeth Moss Kanter wrote a book called Thinking Outside the Building. She says, look broadly for new ideas that you can use. Now let's think for a moment about aerial combat in World War II. You win control of the skies by losing fewer pilots and fewer aircraft. How can you do that? Armor plays a major role, but how much armor? You don't want to have the planes too heavy with armor because they don't maneuver well and they're slower and they use more fuel, they have less range. But you also don't want to have them too light, too little armor, because then they're vulnerable to enemy fire. You want something that the happy medium that's at the peak of that curve. They needed, in effect, efficiency, not just how much armor to have, but where to put the armor to get the most protection with the least weight. Now, according to Jordan Ellenberg's wonderful book, How Not to Be Wrong, the USA had something called the Statistical Research Group, and they studied the aircraft returning from battles in World War II to see where the planes were getting hit the most. It turns out that they had the fewest hits per square foot on the engine, somewhat more on the fuel system, and the most hits per square foot on the fuselage and other parts of the plane. So where do you think more armor should go? There was a person named Abraham Wald, and he was in the statistical research group, and he said that seeing where the planes were getting hit was the wrong way to look at it. His insight was this: the reason planes were coming back with fewer hits to the engine is that planes that got hit in the engine weren't coming back. So they needed to put armor near the engine. The business equivalent: customers who complain are those who metaphorically got shot in the fuselage, but they're still talking to you. The customers who got shot in the metaphorical engine, that is the ones you really annoyed, they don't return. Let's assume that you do not want to be attacked by a shark. Your odds of dying as the result of an unprovoked shark attack are about 30 times higher in Australia than in the United States. Therefore, if you don't want to be attacked by a shark, you should flee Australia immediately and come to the United States. Now, the numbers are correct, but the conclusion is silly. As you relax inside your home in Melbourne, Florida, your odds of a fatal shark encounter are zero. They're zero also when you relax inside your home in Melbourne, Victoria. Your odds of dying while doing something are zero if you don't do that thing. That's why I know I will not die on a roller coaster. It's okay to list the rate of shark attack deaths among the causes of human expiration. It tells us that very, very few people in the world die by shark. But we need to take into account that a far lower percentage of Americans live and play near water containing sharks. If you really want to be safe from sharks, go to Mongolia. It's landlocked. If they want sharks, they have to import them. But of course, there's always the threat of land sharks. We were warned about them in the early days of Saturday Night Live. But so given the threat of Mongolian land sharks, you might as well go back to Australia. There are no verified reports of land sharks there. That whole fishy discussion about sharks is what John Allen Paulos calls innumeracy, which is the mathematical equivalent of illiteracy. It would be like saying we'll be safe from competitors if we focus on the Mongolian market. It's an untapped opportunity. Yes, indeed. Now, I'm not against Mongolia. I'm in favor of logic. And I like Australia. But wait, there's Shark Bay. Oh, never mind. Thing is, numbers don't speak for themselves. If you hear numbers talking, it's not the numbers, it's a story in your head. But it's nice, though, that they invite us for a snack. Come have some pie. Now, we started with a spelling error mistake, like the incorrect digit here. The bigger error is logic mistakes. They can squeak by without even being challenged. It's not just whether the number is right, it's whether we've got the right number. Strategists need to know things like customer loyalty more than petty cash, even though loyalty is harder to calculate. But even an imprecise number on customer loyalty is valuable. When a meteorologist says the odds are 80% that it will rain tomorrow, 80% of the time it rains. It's not perfect, but it's much more useful than no forecast at all. We want certainty, but in competitive strategy, we literally cannot get it. It's not about insufficient or imprecise data. It's because there are no data from the future. We can't measure the future. It hasn't happened. And there are unknowables, not just pandemics and elections and natural disasters, but also competitive response. We try to figure out what to do based on what we think they will do, and they try to figure out what to do based on what they think we will do. And we know that they know, and they know that we know, and there's endless ripple effects. Competitive intelligence is valuable because it helps us understand how they will decide what to do. Scenario thinking is valuable because it opens us up to possible futures. Simulation is valuable because it helps us understand the futures we face and the performance we should expect. And logic is valuable so we don't send anxious Australians to Mongolia. And that's the end. I would like to offer, though, that you please feel free to get in touch with me. I love talking about this kind of stuff. There's my email address, my LinkedIn profile. Let's connect. And thank you again for being here. Tune in for more strategy stories later. Thanks again, and bye for now.